would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Sonia Bukhgalter, and I paint landscapes on gold leaf, and I'm based in Italy for now. Have been here my whole life so far, but we'll see.
Great, great. You have just an amazing technique, and it's very unique. But it sort of borrows as well, like from so many traditional techniques. And I think it's sort of very apt that you're in Italy and you sort
Yeah.
of, because your paintings sort of remind me. I've got that feeling of Renaissance type paintings. So when I was looking back through your Instagram, you had a reel, and you make great reels, by the way. They're very, very
Thank you.
informative. So it said you started painting on gold leaf in 2020. What did you do before that?
Well, it's actually a kind of a long story because I've actually always kind of worked with gold leaf, just not in with this specific style of painting on it with oil paint. So what I do is basically like I was born and raised in Florence in Italy, and my mom is a decorative painter, and she used to work with gold leaf and all kinds of stuff like the traditional techniques that have been passed down through generations of craftsmen in Florence. And I was always like growing up around these artisan studios, and I was always asking like, oh, can I put the gesso on the panel, or can I touch the gold leaf, or stuff like that. And so it was not only natural that I would then start to work in that environment when I was ready to. And so I learned these techniques very early on, and by the time I was like by the end of high school, I was already like sort of part-time working in my mom's studio. And I then all through art school after that, I was working in other studios as well as my mom's. And so I really learned how to use gold leaf really well. And at the same time, I was going to art school, and I was learning about oil paint and more like contemporary techniques. And so I kind of started to like try to figure out how to blend those together. And throughout my years of art school, there was a bunch of like trial and error, and I just was not able to really blend these two elements of like contemporary and ancient techniques. And I couldn't really find something that spoke to me. So then in 2020, I finally managed to like put them together. So I started to paint with oil paint in like transparent glazes over gold leaf. And it really just, it all clicked together at that point. And so, yeah, that's kind of the story of how I got to this technique.
That's fascinating. And like you say, that trial and error thing where you have sort of certain components that you're working on, that you're knowledgeable about, then there are other elements as well. And there often is that moment where it just kind of clicks together. You don't know when it's going to happen, and you can't prepare for it really. But artists are always sort of trying this and trying that, and at some point, if they're lucky, sometimes many artists just carry on doing that it kind of comes together. I think it's interesting as well that you're fusing that ancient or traditional way of working with the contemporary as well, because you do see a lot of traditional art still being made, and I guess a lot in Italy is like that, where it's very much within that kind of field of traditional methods, applications, techniques, but then in many ways it's imitating the old art. Whereas what you've done is you've been able to take different influences, contemporary influences, and fuse the two. So when did you start painting clouds?
Well, that was also in 2020. So, well, first of all, I want to say that I agree with like your observation about like this sort of fusion of like older and newer things. It's like so important, because I believe that fundamentally the old masters of the Renaissance and before then had an amazing grasp on technique and materials, and it was just so important, and still is so important. And of course, artistic expression has to evolve along with us as human beings. But I believe that having a firm grasp on technique and materials is only like all it can do is elevate your work. So absolutely all for taking from the past and bringing it into the contemporary world. But yeah, as for clouds, me painting clouds, I started in 2020. So basically I'd come out of art school, I'd finished my last year, and I did my final exam like just a few months before the pandemic started. So I was basically like ready to go out there and show my work to the world. And I was doing, I ended up doing like geometric abstracts, like enormous paintings of geometric abstracts. And then the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, I can't really get into like galleries and shows and stuff like that, because that's all closed down now. And so then I sort of started really sitting with my geometric abstracts, and I was like, is this really what I'm about? Is this really what I'm trying to put out there into the world? And the answer was no. And so I'd spent, years on that sort of evolving that sort of expression. And I was like, you know what? No. So I completely changed direction. And I've always been like a very outdoorsy person. I like to walk, I like to hike, and just be in nature. So when the pandemic started and the lockdown started in Italy, it was very, very strict lockdown right away. And it was pretty terrifying for me, because I went from being outdoors every day to being stuck in my tiny little apartment. And it was just such a shock for me. And I mean, I was basically climbing the walls because I wanted to be outside. And I would be constantly looking outside, looking at the sky. And it was really the only part of nature that I could really connect with, because being in the city, I couldn't see many like trees or hills or nature. It was just buildings really, and the sky. And so I would see these clouds go by, and the sky being different at different times of the day and between one day and the next. And it was just this real like connection with nature and this longing. And it was always something that would sort of ground me. So whenever my mind would sort of get away with itself and get me into like an anxious state or a depressive state or whatever, I would like if I was able to like look at something of nature, either the sky or some trees, some hills, something, it would sort of ground me and sort of bring me back to reality. And of course, the lockdown was a source of a lot of anxiety and stuff like that. So looking at the sky was like, okay, I'm back to earth, back to reality. And so of course I naturally started painting these clouds. And at first it was kind of just like with watercolors and just kind of playing around with different materials and techniques. And eventually I started to do, like, I went back to oil paint, which I've always loved. And I started to like see what I could do with gold leaf as well, because I had some in my apartment. And that's when it sort of started to come together. And I was like, you know what, this is really wonderful for me. I love doing this. And I felt like, yeah, this is what I want to be expressing in the world.
That's incredible. Sort of those alignments of a few things. And as you were talking there about the lockdown and abstraction and clouds and stuff, it's interesting because it's similar with me in a way. I mean, I grew up in the countryside. I lived in many places near the sea and stuff, but I was living in London and I was mainly painting abstract paintings. I wasn't putting them out there or anything, but they were very minimal, kind of geometric, but with painterly elements. But living in the city, I started to reconnect with the skies, especially where I'm from in East Anglia in the UK, with massive skies. And I started to get this longing, which you talked about there. And I often talk about this in relation to my work, that there was this sort of romanticism and longing for the landscape that really started to rise in me, especially when I was in London, and I was there for 12 years, you know, living a very busy life, tube, but you just get in between the buildings these little glimpses of the sky. And with the tradition of landscape painting, especially British landscape painting, it came about during the Industrial Revolution, when many of the people had to leave the countryside and go to the city, and they were kind of in these industrial areas where they could hardly see the sky and there was lots of smog, but they started to romanticize and create this idea of longing around the countryside and the skies, and almost create a deity out of it. And Constable and Turner kind of sort of satisfied that need in many ways. And so I find that really interesting that you said that there's you tap into what actually inspires you, combine that with the techniques, and you get that sort of almost perfect fusion. The stars align.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that nature is really sacred. I mean, I was about to say sacred in a way, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say it's sacred. It's fully sacred, and that's I feel that also is what I'm trying to represent in my work, because having seen so many beautiful examples of sacred art in Christian churches in Italy and in Florence especially, there's some incredible artwork with gold, and it was always used to like elevate these sacred icons. And it's kind of like I feel like that's kind of what I'm doing with nature. And I paint like there's this sort of little technical detail that I really love, is that like the most sacred subjects like angels' wings and the baby Jesus and like the absolutely most sacred and celestial subjects were painted over the gold. So there wasn't usually there was no gold underneath. They would just do like gold around the figure, mostly because gold is expensive, of course. And so it would make more sense to not gild areas that were not seen. But these absolutely sacred subjects were with gold underneath. And all of my paintings, like the whole landscape has gold leaf underneath. And that's like, I feel like I'm trying to say, like, look, this is my most sacred subject. This is my religion. It's sacred to me. So I feel like I'm trying to express that too.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it's beautiful. You know, it really is. And again, that you are able to align, you know, both the material, but also that metaphysical quality as well with it. And yeah, it's brilliant. Simon, do you have a question at all?
Yeah, I mean, you touched upon this a moment ago when discussing your reaction during the pandemic, but I did read one of your posts on Instagram, and I always really appreciate when artists open up and share personal aspects of their development with the audience about mental health and how painting the sky kind of it just gave this perspective on the problems that can, not to use a pun, but cloud kind of our feelings sometimes. Can you expand upon, I suppose, what you were saying in that post? And also, I can imagine you've had somewhat of a reaction from people who are fans and followers of your work, because it is just beautiful and speaks to so many people. So do you mind expanding upon that a little bit more?
Absolutely. I found that I mean, this idea that the sky and clouds can ground you really is something that when I started putting my work out there into the world, and I found that it really like resonated with a lot of people, and I wasn't completely expecting that. And it was just so amazing to me because like it wasn't a specific like type of person. Like, for example, like I tend to get a lot of spiritual people reacting to my art, but it's not like only Christians or only Muslims, or, you know, I've gotten a lot of people who are also like not following a specific religion or anything, but they just do consider themselves spiritual in their own way. Like they believe in some kind of universal connection, or like a sort of I don't know, higher power in a way. But some of them maybe don't even know if that's true or not for them personally, but they just have that sort of feeling inside them. And it's just absolutely incredible to see like these wonderful, really positive people just sort of gather around my work. And it's been like an absolute honor, I have to say, an honor, because like I didn't think I'd accumulate like this like community around my work that is just so kind-hearted and positive, and to me and to each other. And it's just amazing. And it makes me think like, wow, if what I am putting out there is drawing people like that, I don't know, it just it's an honor. I mean, I'm running out of words here to describe it, because it's just so amazing. And it's weird because this form of expression, it kind of came from one of the most negative periods of my life, because I mean, I've always been prone to like mental health issues such as depression and anxiety, especially when I was living in the city, because I have now I realize more what the issue is. I have like a high sensitivity to noise, and it contributes to my anxiety. But I had no idea. Like, I'd always lived in the city. I'd always been very anxious, very jumpy, and very tired all the time. And it just was the norm. And so that accumulated, and throughout my life I've had very negative moments, and the pandemic was one of them. I was very depressed and feeling very lost too, because I'd come out of art school and I just said like, okay, this whole project of geometric abstraction is not working. Like, what am I going to do now? And so I was pretty low. But it was just like I literally had this moment where it just clicked, because I looked at the sky and I just felt that washing away of problems. It's like, you know, yeah, my problems still exist, but they're not as enormous as I thought they were. And yeah, I feel that, I mean, a lot of people sort of need that in their lives. And I'm really, really glad that my work can kind of make people feel that way. And it's amazing.
Yeah. And it's seen in the work, you know, that there is this kind of transcendent quality to it, you know. And I think, you know, the artist sometimes, and it's a cliche, isn't it, that the artist produce beautiful work, but behind the easel they're suffering, you know. And there's some truth in it, right? But I think sometimes if you're able to communicate this visual poetry, these things, you know, it benefits you and it benefits the other people, because you found a channel of communication where you are able to find this sort of sublime element of life, this kind of transcendence from it. And also other people find that as well. And, you know, I often find it as well with my work that people sort of comment that kind of thing. Because with me, it's sort of been ages of trying to paint in a visual language that I wanted to paint, you know, in that kind of way. And when you realise that it's sort of communicating with other people, that other people can hear it, can see it, I mean, it's the most beautiful feeling, isn't it? And I think, you know, with mental health and things like that, and I've got a background, personal mental health, but working in mental health, running art groups for people with mental health, and just seeing how, you know, these forms of expression can really, really set you free and give you that kind of vocabulary, in a way, a visual vocabulary, to say what you can't say with words. sometimes. It's very special.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that like there's this quote from one of my absolute favorite artists, Mark Rothko, and the quote is that art is an experience. Essentially, I'm probably quoting it wrong. It's a bit longer than that, but um, I really like that. Really resonates with me. Like, I'm not painting a picture here. I'm not trying to like literally describe a landscape or something. I am having an experience and transmitting an experience. So like my experience is cathartic because I paint this picture, I express what I'm going through, and it's out there and it's ready to interact with people in the world. And then when somebody sees my work, the experience continues in them. And like I still remember this one time that I did an art fair in London, and it was like the final day, almost closing time basically. And I had an awesome time. There's so many people just like really feeling my work, and I had so many meaningful conversations. It was just so amazing. And then at the end, this woman came up, and she was just like looking at my work, at my whole stand, just like in awe. And I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. And she started to talk to me a little bit, and she was like, wow, I really feel like the spirituality in these paintings and stuff like that. And like we had a brief conversation about that, and then she just sort of like crouched down, like sat in front of my stand, and I was just like, wow, I can see she's going through the experience right now. She's having an experience in front of my work. And so I just stood there. I was just like, just watching her have the experience of my work. And that was just amazing, like incredible. So yeah, I believe it's an experience. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating again to talk to artists and to see that passion, but also that that feeling of it, but it being not just something that we do for a job, for example. Like we're not just drawing or painting adverts, that type of thing. That it is a way of life, and for better or worse, sometimes it's a way of life. And Rothko, I love Rothko as well. And Rothko was a deeply sort of I mean, Rothko, for example, despised pop art. There's this famous thing where he bumps into Andy Warhol in the street and just kind of curses and turns his back and walks away, because for him Rothko was like, art is this kind of sublime entity. It's not to be kind of fused with pop culture and stuff like that. Simon, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, I also was interested in a period in 2021 when you went to Iceland and you created these paintings using faux silver leaf and oil on board. Is that a similar material to use? And what was because it's quite a different palette to what you've developed now, where it's it's all really beautiful kind of ethereal kind of colors, and you had this kind of really grounded Iceland feeling, very I don't know, earth colors in there, and like lots of just like a completely different environment that you'd captured there. So can you talk about the development of that series of work a little for us?
Yeah, absolutely. That was I was still in the sort of early phases of developing my technique, and I was still like I enjoyed silver leaf a lot because it's something that appears in traditional furniture decoration and stuff like that. But it's just not as common as gold leaf. It's not as yeah, just not used as much, but it's an incredibly beautiful and delicate material. And so I'd worked with it before, and so I wanted to try my technique on gold with silver, and I wanted to see what this cold background would bring out. And Iceland just kind of I like to say that Iceland decided the colors that I was going to use, including the silver, because so basically I planned this trip because what with the pandemic and everything, it was basically impossible to travel. And that's another thing that I've always done a lot. And so I felt like, okay, I'm trapped in Italy. That's not something that I want. So I managed to like figure out how to travel in 2021, and things were just barely starting to open up again. And I knew I wanted to go somewhere cold, somewhere in the north. And I had originally thought about like Norway or Sweden or places like that, but they were still like locked down. They were not accepting tourists. So Iceland was the only far north country in near Europe, relatively, that was accepting visitors. So I started to plan, and I realized that it's a very expensive country. So what I did was I signed up for a workaway experience where I did this sort of like farm stay, and it was this sheep farm in the northwest. Yes, northwest. And it was also bed and breakfast. So like I would do odd jobs for the first half of the day. And then the rest of the time, I was just absolutely free to wander around and paint and see this beautiful landscape that it just struck me so much, because it's like the land itself there is young. So like compared to the rest of the earth, like it's full of these volcanoes and like just really new earth. And it's easy to imagine how something like a place like Italy would have been like millennia ago. And it was just incredible. And it was a landscape that I'd never really experienced before. And all in that 1 month, I managed to see an active volcano. I saw a glacier for the first time in my life. I saw incredible like waterfalls and just very unusual landscapes. And I'd gone there fully intending to paint, of course, and to explore this sort of different landscape and see what it brought up for me. And I brought along a bunch of like pre-gilded panels. So there was some gold and some silver, because I didn't really know what was going to happen. And I got there, and Iceland told me you need to use silver, because it was just like I would have felt like gold would not do it justice. So that's just kind of what it said to me. And I started to like really just get into the landscape. And it's not something that you can do in a short amount of time. Like a month absolutely flew by. It was just so fast. And I felt like I was barely scratching the surface. So I do fully intend to go back there one day. I'm kind of like searching for art residences and stuff like that, because I would love to take a deeper dive into that really like new young earth landscape. So yeah, that was the experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting, to respond as the artist to what you see, to what you're feeling as well. When it comes to techniques, and I know you answer these questions a bit in your reels, oil on the gold leaf, because it's obviously non-absorbent. Is that right? So,
Yes.
so you're painting. Are you mixing any mediums with your oil? Explain a little bit about your techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I don't mix any particular medium with my oil. Like initially I was just using your basic linseed oil, no solvents, because I try to use as little solvents as possible, because they're really bad for the environment. And so no solvents, also because they alter the gold leaf. They tarnish it and destroy it. But so basically just linseed oil. Then I sort of moved to walnut oil because it was less yellowing. And recently I have discovered liquin, which I find is just fantastic, because it really evens out the tones of the color, the sheen, and it's very like comfortable to use, and it speeds up the drying time just enough so that I can work a little bit more efficiently, but not so much that I can't like have a proper like long sitting with a painting. So basically the fact that the gold is non-absorbent is actually a good thing. Because essentially throughout history, when painting on gold leaf surfaces, what was used is basically these types of paints that were essentially fat based in a sense. So like no water based, like the binder itself. So like egg tempera was a very commonly used paint because it's water soluble, but the binder itself is the egg yolk. So it's a fatty binder. And casein paint is also another medium that can be used, but nothing like, for example, watercolor that would just like there's a lot of water content in that paint, so it would just sort of bead on the surface, and it wouldn't really stick. So yeah, oil I find is really, really good because it allows me to sort of like work in these transparent glazes, which I feel is very, very important if you have gold underneath your paint, because you want to really bring that luminosity and transparency, luminosity through the transparencies up until like the final version of your painting. So, because I mean, otherwise, if you're not doing that, if you're working in opaque layers, then you might as well just not gild underneath.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I hope that kind of answers the questions.
Well, you've got the
yeah,
light.
I get asked.
Yeah,
Sorry?
you get the light coming through because you've got that lovely luminosity, and you know, in many ways, it's sort of, say with oil painting, and when I teach it, I always will tone the surface because I want to get rid of the whites, because I always say it's not watercolor painting when you want the luminosity of the white paper to come through. But what I think is really interesting with yours is it's got that inner light, and I found it interesting what you're saying about the opaque pigments there, because you could put an opaque pigment on it and it just totally destroys that glow, that inner light, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So with your white paints, are you using just titanium white, lead whites?
That's a very good question. Initially, I was using titanium white because I didn't really know my options too well yet. But I immediately realized it was very opaque, very heavy on that gold. And so still not being very informed, I tried to like keep using it, but very, very diluted. And eventually I did some research and I did some tests, and I finally landed on flake white. So that is absolutely perfect for me. I've like switched over to it completely. I have this old tube of titanium white that's just sitting there and it's been completely abandoned because it's so much lighter and more transparent, and it allows that luminosity from the gold to shine through.
And it's the traditional white, isn't it, as well? So flake white is, for the audience, lead white, and it was made originally from basically stacking lead up like that and then putting vinegar, I think, and horse manure or something like that. But what happens to the lead over time and creates this white, flaky type stuff, which they grind into a pigment. You can't actually use it here in the UK, which is crazy. I've got some of it. I managed to buy some, but it handles just so, like, people often think that sort of the best white for more transparent stuff for glazing is zinc, but zinc isn't quite there. But flake white is beautiful because you can get it very thinned out, but the impasto on it as well. If you look at some, say, Van Dyck portraits, there's a guy with a ruffle like this, and it's lead white. It's just beautiful. It can go like whipped cream or anything. It's a very, very nice colour, nice pigment side.
Yeah.
So talking about colours, what is your palette? What colours do you use? Do you use the same?
Oh, yeah. I love talking about this kind of stuff. um, so yeah, I've gradually started to develop this palette over the years, and it's always kind of changing. It also depends on like if I'm going through a certain phase where I don't know, I'm maybe like very focused on lilacs or something, then I'll maybe integrate some different reds and different blues. But generally, like I think the most absolutely fundamental color that I would not be able to do without is burnt sienna, because I use that for all of my sort of transparent underpainting that I put for like all of my paintings. And like ever since I started doing that, it's just brought the luminosity and the strength of my colors way up there. It's just like been like night and day, really. So that is absolutely the base of everything. So
Can I ask you
number one,
a nerdy question on that? Is it PR 101? So TPR 101, transparent pigment red 101, burnt sienna, or is it PBR? Oh, what is it? PBR 6. So there's sort of two different siennas. One is the more opaque one, and one is more transparent. Which one is it?
well, I actually have a mix because I'm lucky that I know a lot of artists and I have known a lot of like older generation artists who maybe like don't paint anymore, or like hobby artists. So I have been gifted a lot of colors and paintbrushes and stuff like that. So I tend to try and use the transparent one, but I think that the less transparent, like the more opaque one is still okay if I dilute it with a lot of liquid. So yeah, I mean, I try not to waste as much as possible. And it's definitely usable. So yeah, but obviously I prefer the transparent one.
It's good. And your other colors?
Oh yeah, well, my other colors, so I like to have generally a spread of like all your basic colors, but with like a warm variation and a cool variation. So I'll have like a more sort of like yellowy orangey red and a more sort of like purplish almost red. And the same thing with blue. I'll have a more greenish blue, like for example, what was it? Prussian blue. I'll have a Prussian blue, and then I'll have an ultramarine blue that's a lot more like warm and purpley. And so I find that having that option is like really, really important because like when mixing, like it's a super important thing to consider, because if you have like if you're trying to mix a warm color and one of your variations of like one of the colors that you're putting in there is a cool variation, it'll really like bring down the color a lot. It'll make it like muddier than you would expect it to be. But maybe that's exactly what you want. So, you know, it's very important to have that option of warm and cool variations for every color.
So this is a split primary palette. I often use it as well. So a normal primary would be, for example, ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow, cadmium red. But by having a warm and cool version of each, and sometimes you can see that most in the amount of greens you could make if you had a warm yellow and a cool yellow, or a warm blue and a cool blue. The greens you can make is just a whole spectrum. But like you were saying there about the sort of bringing colours down. So if you're trying to make a violet and you've got ultramarine blue, then you've got a choice of two reds. One is say rose madder and one is cadmium red light. Because the cadmium red light is leaning towards orange, and orange and blue are complementary colours. When you mix those together, rather than exaggerating each other, they sort of cancel each other out. So that violet's going to be really dull. But because the rose madder is leaning more towards violet anyway, when you mix that ultramarine blue, you're going to get a really, really strong violet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, there's just so much that you can learn studying these colors and color theory in general. Talking about that, there's like generally there's this technique that I use, what with the transparent glazing that I do, I like to build colors like through layers. So like, especially when I'm doing like hills, I'll have like, I'll start out with my burnt sienna, and then I'll glaze over it with like some ultramarine blue, which cools it off and darkens it a bit. And then I'll come in with like a more like yellowish color or an earth pigment or something. And like through the various layers, I'll sort of push the color in different directions. So like I'll look at it and be like, okay, these hills are too cool, they're too blue. So I'll come in with a layer of color that takes them away from that. And so like I really enjoy doing that, using like unmixed colors, like just plain ultramarine blue or plain flake white or plain whatever, and just layering it until I get to the color that I want.
Is that called optical mixing? Is that right?
Well, I think so. I think so. I'm not quite sure about the term itself, but probably.
Fascinating. Have you ever, or do you ever make your own paints that sort of use dry pigment? And
Well, I have in the past, and it's very enjoyable, and I feel that you can get some very interesting colors and very interesting textures that you can have a lot of fun with. Lately, like in the past couple of years, I haven't really been doing that so much, mainly because of like convenience. Because I have some very good tubes of colors. So I really I don't feel the need, but sometimes like sometimes I'll do it for like specific colors. Like I got this like fluorescent pigment at a certain point that I got in like Canada. And so I brought it back to Italy, and what with it being a pigment, I was like, okay, let's see what I can do with this. So I made that into an oil paint that I was then sort of experimenting with in some paintings. So yeah, I mean, it's always an option, and it's a good option to have and know how to do. But it's a little bit time consuming sometimes.
yes, I've made my own paints quite a few times, and most recently, because I paint in gouache quite a lot, and gouache tubes are very small, I thought, well, if I want to create bigger paintings, so I'm going to make my own gouache. So ordered some more pigments and binder and some tubes, and spent maybe an hour and a half creating about that much, and I just put it all to one side and said I'll do it another day. But it is very time consuming. But I think it's important to, as an artist, to understand and to know how to make a paint, and that the pigments aren't just these things in tubes, and they come from materials, and how they're coated, and all of that kind of the alchemy behind it, basically.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's super, super important, because it also gives you an insight into how that specific color will behave. So like how absorbent that pigment is, like how it will behave. Like sometimes when painting with oil, like now that I use liquid, it's different because it sort of evens out the sheen of every color. But I used to notice this a lot before, that when I used like earth pigments, they would sort of like be more opaque compared to other colors. And that is because of the pigment that they're made from. They tend to be more absorbent materials, simply. So that's, I mean, that's just one of the many little insights that you can get knowing what you're working with. And I always, like every time I talk about art, I always stress the importance of knowing what you're working with. Because I mean, there's a lot of information out there, and it'll take some time for sure to get through all of it. But the important thing is to always be learning, because you can stumble on some really like basic stuff simply by not knowing about how that pigment behaves, or that material. So I actually had this experience a while back. So this is it was quite a specific experience, because I was trying to experiment with how to prep my canvases for the gold leaf. because I'd always painted on board, and gold leaf historically has always been on board and rigid supports. So I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I like make the surface very smooth, but also keep it flexible? And so I tried to do like a silicone based preparation. And it all went fine, and it was really nice. So then I painted some canvases with that, and then I went to varnish them with your basic sort of like final gloss varnish, which is usually resin based, and it just would not dry. And it was initially I thought, oh, maybe this varnish is old or something, so I'll buy a new one. And it would do the same, and it would just not dry for like ever. And I was doing all the things to help it dry, and it was not budging. So I took a deep dive on the internet and through all kinds of forums and stuff. And I found out that these resin-based varnishes will never dry if they have contact with silicone. So yeah, and I was like, oh my goodness, I just ruined a bunch of paintings. So then I managed to strip that varnish without damaging the paintings, with some alcohol. I managed to, again, lots of trial and error, patch testing, various solvents. And then I found out that there's alcohol-based varnishes that will not have that issue. So I went in with those, and I varnished my paintings, and it was all fine in the end. But it was obviously a very nightmarish week.
Yeah.
But it's so important. Like,
Yeah.
if you know the theory behind these things, you don't stumble like that. You know that certain materials just do not sit with each other.
But sometimes you need to go through that journey, and I'm someone who's, I kind of read. Let's talk about colour for a moment. So I bought loads of books over the years about colour, and it just didn't go in. And I bought every tube possible, but then decided once just to do a primary palette, and I learned more about just trial and error and doing it from that journey. And now when I read the books, it makes sense, but I've not wasted, because it's all worth it, but you go down these little avenues with certain materials, and then, like you were saying, you come up to that block, but you find that solution. Do you still use the silicone base?
I do not.
No.
I did away with that completely, because the alcohol-based varnish was just too shiny for me. I felt it made my paintings look wet, and I didn't really like that at all. So now it's just a gesso base, very fine canvas and very fine gesso that I sand a lot. But it's really like it's way better, because I can just put this normal varnish that I was used to that has in my opinion, the perfect level of shine to it that doesn't make the painting look wet. But yeah, about encountering these issues, I feel that it's inevitable to enter into these situations, and it's very important. And I think it fundamentally depends on each individual and how we learn. So like I'm the type of person who, like you, needs to like actually go through the experience and have that happen to really learn about that. So like I'm not the type of person who would like preventatively read about silicone and varnish interaction. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there who maybe have like a more analytical kind of mind who would go through that. And I mean, I feel it's an individual choice. But yeah, getting your hands dirty is my lifestyle.
Absolutely. Right, Simon, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a question which you ended up answering anyway without me asking, because I was going to ask about pitfalls and things that can go wrong, and then you just organically came up with a great example. Because there's going to be listeners and viewers of this podcast who are at all different levels of their journey in artwork, I try to ask more naive questions sometimes for my own education and for the benefit of people who may not know as much, about what happens when you try to experiment with paint. So instead, I thought it's a bit of a it's a bit of a tangent, a bit of a, diversion from what we've been discussing, but do you use sketchbooks at all?
I do. I do. I have a sketchbook that I keep. I've been through several. I don't always finish them, but most of the time. I feel it's pretty fundamental because it's this kind of, like, at least for me, it's this kind of space where I can just be like unlimited. So like it's not, there's like no pressure. So like if I scribble up an entire page of my sketchbook and it turns like pitch black because I just have a bunch of charcoal on it, it's fine. I mean, nobody's gonna like judge me for that or call it bad art or whatever, it's not something that I'm like presenting as a like fully finished painting or anything, but it gives me that freedom, that sort of childlike playfulness to just like do whatever. And then through that, like flipping through the sketchbook, I kind of like see this evolution of feelings and states of mind, just sort of flowing. And that kind of gives me an idea, like inspiration or something. And I'll be like, okay, these pages are like really dark and moody, and like I'll throw some poetry in there sometimes, and just maybe sometimes random scribbles, and it all sort of creates a mood. And that really helps me to like come up with things, because it's not just like a visual inspiration. Like a lot of times I'll look outside and see a beautiful cloud and I'll be like, okay, I'll take a picture of that for later because I could include it in some painting or something. But seeing as what I do is not only about representation, like visual descriptive representation, I also feel like I need a sort of mood or an idea to back it up. So like maybe a storm painting, I'll have some pictures of storm clouds saved, or I'll have some sketches of storm clouds done from life. And like I sort of put all these things together. Maybe I'll have like jotted down a bunch of like poems or random phrases or, stuff like that. And it just all sort of comes together. And I'm like, okay, I can make a painting or two or three out of that mood, out of that state of mind. And it's just very freeing, because like, I mean, I'll have, sometimes there's just like absolutely ridiculous stuff in there. Like I was flipping through my sketchbook the other day, and there was this one page where in the corner I had written down, "Big news, I'm happy," and the date, and that's it. So it's like, it's very freeing. So I feel it's fundamental. And some people like to have a very organized sketchbook, and I'm all for that. It's just never really been my style. I like to get messy and just sort of do a bunch of random stuff in my sketchbook. So yeah, but always keep one.
As well,
I recommend that.
You mentioned charcoal. Do you also paint with gouache in there, or do you use any other colors to kind of work out ideas? Because it's such a complex thing to create the kinds of paintings that you do. There must be surely some working out that you do in the sketchbook with color as well. How do you do that?
Yes. Yeah, well, I have several methods, and I kind of bounce between them. I'm very, very much like that. I kind of like, I don't like to be organized unless I have to. It's kind of weird, but I'm kind of comfortable in chaos. So I have like oil pastels, I have watercolors, I have some acrylics, some gouache, a bit of everything basically. And I even have a tablet with a little drawing program on it. So I'll do like whatever I feel can best express what's in my head at that time. So like sometimes I'll even like gild a little scrap of canvas with like some leftover gold, and then do something with like oil pastels on it that I then dilute with liquid. So I'm basically replacing the tubes with the pastels. And I'll do like a little sketch, and sometimes I'll just go straight on the tablet right away and sort of work it out from there. Like it's maybe more schematic, or I don't know. It really depends. Kind of unpredictable.
Yeah.
Did I see you on one of your reels that you had your painting that you were working on, and then you had your tablet, and you were kind of maybe working out which tones go where next.
Yeah,
So
that's something I do
yeah.
actually. So like sometimes paintings will just like flow really easily, and my plan will just come to fruition like that. And I love those paintings, but I also love the paintings that just fight you every step of the way. And when that happens, I'll be like, I'll do like the first step of my painting, and then maybe I'll get stuck, and I'm like, okay, something's wrong here, but I can't really figure out what. So I'll take a picture of it, put it on my tablet, and start doing like, okay, what if I darkened this area? And I do that, and it's like, okay, no, that doesn't help at all. So I erase it and I try something else. So I don't have to like just blindly dive into the painting and maybe like mess it up. And I found that really helps me a lot, because I tend to be kind of impulsive in that. I'll want to like intervene on the painting right away. And it's like being able to do it on the tablet first has helped me save a lot of paintings and not have to start over.
That's really interesting that you've got that little detachment, because I tend to do it, not so much anymore, but I used to do that because I used to get on the train a lot, and some of the paintings I couldn't work out, I would kind of just have on my iPad and then sit there in a Procreate or whatever I was using at the time and just adjust it. And it helps just step away from it and see it with new eyes as well. You know, there's that. Just a technical question again. Taking photographs of paintings, finished paintings, is quite difficult to get the light right. How difficult is it to deal with when you've got gold leaf behind it?
That's an excellent question. I was actually really lucky that in my art school there were like several classes that one could take that were not just about painting. So there was like a marketing class, which was amazing and helped so much. And there was a photography class, which again was incredible. And the teacher was like really dedicated. And he was the teacher for the photography students as well. So he, like, for us, it was just one class because we were the painting students. And but he would have like regular classes with the photography students, and that really helped a lot because I just literally asked him, like, because I was still working on gold leaf, but like for decorative like furniture or panels or whatever, it was like a completely different style. But I straight up asked him, I was like, how could I get this in, you know, a decent photo of this? And so he helped me. So he had a diffused light and a white sheet of paper or a panel or something that was white. And he sort of like bounced the light off of this white panel so that the gold was facing this light colored surface that was being illuminated, and that would show on the gold. So the gold was not like glaring and it wasn't like dark either. It was just this good diffused balance. And so I have that set up now in my studio, where I try to like point the, actually you can probably see I have these sort of arched ceilings.
Yes, I was going to ask you about the new studio, because it's amazing.
Yeah, it's that's a nice topic as well. So, but finishing the photography issue, so what I do is I have these like diffused lights, like photography lights, and I'll point one up at this arched ceiling, and I'll have the painting like on an easel, like at an angle that's kind of looking at this ceiling, and so it catches that diffused soft light, and that really helps. And I'll have a mix of like cold light and warm light, so it's more balanced. But yeah, it's not a simple thing to photograph one's work, but it's so important. Like, I found that it's like on social media and on your website or whatever, like fundamentally the one way you have of showing your work is photographs or videos of it. So you can't actually show like half the world you're painting like physically. You have to photograph it. So that's like super, super important to learn. And if, I mean, I was lucky I had that class in my university, but it's so worth it to invest in like a few photography classes or something, or just straight up ask a photographer friend or
Absolutely.
something.
I mean, you mentioned a couple of things about that, the photography, but also the marketing, which you've both got down. I mean, you've got those so well. It's so interesting being an artist, isn't it, nowadays, that these kind of things, because it used to be that you would paint your work, the gallery would take the photos, it goes out of your hand. But I think you're an example of how you become successful in this new kind of hybrid space. But you've kind of got to know what you're doing on myriad levels, and it can. It's kind of like a house of cards in that sense. I mean, you could be doing all of this amazing stuff, but if the photography lets you down, it's so I find it fascinating. Again, just a quick technical question: you do quite a lot of the photos if you hold in work outside. How does that work?
Well, that has to be like a good sort of time of day. And I'll usually, like, since I don't really have control of the outdoor light at all, what I'll do is I'll kind of wander around and try to find the best angle. And like maybe sometimes I'll want a certain backdrop, but the light is bad. And so like maybe I'll wait until like the afternoon instead of the morning or something and see if that changes. Otherwise, I'll just change spot or change angle, and that usually helps. But yeah, it involves a lot of wandering around with the paintings.
Yeah. You get your steps in by doing it.
Yeah.
So about your studio, so it's relatively new. I mean, the building's obviously not new, but as a studio, tell us about.
Yeah. It's a new space for me. So basically, I've always wanted to live in the countryside, and so at a certain point, I was living in this apartment in Florence by myself, and just with the pandemic and everything, it just got absolutely miserable. And then after that, there was like the energy crisis, so I was barely scraping by, and my bills like skyrocketed as well. And I was like, I do not like this. I mean, I'm paying loads of money to live in a place that I don't enjoy at all, and is generally not helpful to my mental health either. And in the meantime, my mom had found this beautiful house in the countryside, and had managed to buy it outright. And it's a very unique house because it's basically like this monastery that is in the middle of like the Tuscan hills in the south of Tuscany. And so like in the style of a lot of old Italian towns, the houses sort of like congregate around the church. So this is like a mini version of that. So there's this monastery and like 4, 5, 6 houses partially attached to it and partially not. So there was this house that has like the living area upstairs, and the sort of basement-ish area is where I am now. It used to be part of the monastery, thus the arched ceilings. And it's a studio space now for shared between me and my mom. And because I decided at a certain point, like, I'm paying for this terrible apartment that I do not enjoy. I'm not too proud to move back in with my mom. I'll do it if it's helpful to my mental health. And me and my mom have always gotten along really well, so it's always nice to be with her. So I moved here, and it's just been really really great. I've been back into like hiking and stuff like that, which I've always loved. And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful area, beautiful hills, beautiful forests, and just such a clear view of the sky. And the monastery is actually still active. There's like, I think 6 nuns who live there, and they're very nice.
I mean, it just suits your work as well. Like,
Yes.
painting your style in the old monastery is just fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to ask, have you turned your hand to plein air painting at all? Tried that out,
Oh,
yeah?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy plein air a lot. So what I'll do is like when I have some more time, so usually like between shows or art fairs or whatever, or deadlines, there's always some kind of deadline. But when I find a bit of peace and tranquility, I can usually find the time to go out. I have like a little setup with like a little sort of box that I can keep all of my stuff in, and I bring out like a camping chair, or sometimes I'll just bring out my foldable easel, and like I'll plan it, because things change quickly out in nature. So I'll think like, okay, the sunset is at this time or that time. I'll get ready, hike up somewhere in the hills, and wait for the sunset. And like maybe in the meantime, I'll do some like preparatory sketches to like figure out the placement of the landscape beforehand. And then when golden hour hits, like at the sunset, I start to actually paint. And a lot of it, like plein air is hard. It's a difficult thing to do. So a lot of what I paint when I'm out there is not something that I would say, okay, I can sell this, I can put this on my website, you know. But it helps so much to maintain a sort of more natural and loose style. So like you're regularly like sort of consulting your source, your original source, the actual real landscape, you know. And so I have all of these sketches that I do. Some of them will be on gold. Like I have like scraps of canvas that I gild, and I keep them for like plein air sketching. And sometimes I'll just do it on a primed plain canvas. I'll prime it with a warm tone or something, and use those, because it always helps. I always learn something new. And so yeah, I have these sketches that I accumulate, and I don't throw a single one of them out, even if they're like really ugly or something. But I just learn so much, because like even if on a technical level they're really like quickly done and undetailed or whatever, they still manage to have the feeling of that spot at that time. So it really helps so much. And I can usually bring like from one or two sketches, I can usually come up with several new paintings, like actual studio paintings. So yeah, plein air, hard, but I fully recommend it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things as well that, as long as you're looking, watching, sketching, whatever, it's all feeds back into your main practice. I don't paint plein air that much. I sometimes just make sketches, but I'm constantly looking at the clouds wherever I go, and it's all absorbing in that. Then when I do paint, I can sort of rely on that memory. So I think plein air is very similar. It's that exercise in looking, that exercise of being present and absorbing those forms. Do you paint with your clouds? And do you tend to paint a lot from your imagination or memory?
Yes and no. So like I'm able to paint clouds from imagination and memory now, because of experience. So like I can, like I generally know how a cloud behaves when it comes in contact with light, and like how the form is created. But I don't like to do that too many times in a row, because they kind of start looking a bit similar between one and the other. So what I like to do is again, jump back to plein air, even just sketching them from life. it helps so much because it brings back that sort of natural shape of the clouds, the variations. There's all kinds of different ways that a cloud can just be, and so that is something that I always go back to. But sometimes we'll have a stretch of weather where it's just blue skies and there's really nothing that I can latch onto. So that's why, like, if I have a huge collection of photos of clouds that I've saved throughout the years and that people have sent me, and it's very big, very big collection. But what I do is, okay, I can't see any clouds in the sky. I'll check out my photographs. I'll sketch these photographs. I'll try to mix and match and sort of, get creative, starting from that, base of that photograph. And so that usually helps me stick to like a sort of more realistic, like believable version of a cloud, rather than something that is sort of has lost its nature, really. Because if it goes through your memory and your imagination too many times, it just kind of loses its essence, I feel.
It's got all of those kind of filters over it.
Yeah.
And it goes towards abstraction. Whereas I kind of like that, pushing it towards that sort of abstraction point, and then just sort of bringing it back a little bit so it's still recognizable, but it's still there. So question about like business and galleries and stuff. How do you work? Do you mainly are you sort of self-contained in that sense? Do you have galleries representing you? How do you do it?
Okay, well, that's a great question, and it's actually a point that I'm quite proud of myself, because I've managed to like use social media to create a situation for myself where I'm not dependent on galleries. So that's not to say that I won't like collaborate with galleries. I'm very happy to, but it's sort of more secondary. So like I like if I'm approaching a gallery, or if a gallery is approaching me, I am in a position where I know that I can sell my own work already. So this gallery has to be able to bring something to the table that is not just selling my work. It should, in my opinion, help elevate my name, give me some degree of prestige or something, get me into art fairs that are galleries only and I would not be able to access otherwise. So, that's an added value that I can't create for myself. So yeah, I collaborated until just recently with a gallery in London. And it was like my first sort of gallery collaboration, and it didn't really bring anything in particular. So now I'm getting ready to collaborate with a gallery in Vermont, in the US. So that's something that's going to be happening in the next like couple of months, and so hopefully that'll go differently. But generally, what I do is I have my social media that is my main sort of attraction, let's say, because it gets my work seen. I'm able to create content in a way that the algorithm of Instagram or TikTok favors it and pushes it to new audiences for free, essentially, because I'm not paying for advertisement. And that has brought a lot of people to my website from there. And it's really an incredible tool, because I'm able to sell out my collections entirely. It didn't start out that way, of course, but it's something that I really, really recommend learning about social media. See, I've never been a social media kind of person. I don't post about my private life on Facebook or whatever. But it was kind of like, because I was trying to start out as an artist when the lockdowns were in full swing, I kind of didn't have a choice because I couldn't get into any in-person events because there just weren't any. So I started to like take a really good look at how to make social media work for me. And it took a lot of trial and error. And it took me a while to also find my own personal balance with it, because it's essentially a tool, and it should be seen as such. It's not something that should like damage your self-esteem or your mental health. It is purely a tool. And it's very easy to think like you put a post out there and you put your work out there, and it gets like 2 likes or something, and you immediately tend to like think, okay, my work is bad. Like the first thing an artist attacks is their own work. And that is like, it took me years to learn that that is the last thing that should be attacked when it comes to social media, because there's so many factors. I mean, there's stuff like trending music, and the quality of your video, and the lighting in your photos, and that those are all factors. The hashtags that you use, those are all factors that contribute to whether your post or your video gets picked up by the algorithm or not. And all of those things come before your art itself in the post. So first of all, if a post does poorly, the first thing I learned to look at is, okay, is it a poor quality video? Did I sort of slip up in my content creation? Did I not use the right hashtags? That sort of stuff. That's what I attack first. And then after all of that, I think, okay, maybe the painting isn't as good as I thought it was.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
usually that's not the case. Social media is very like, it's hard to strike that balance. So for the first like couple of years, I was not really getting anywhere, and my following was growing very slowly, and I was really like confused and just sort of wandering around in the dark, basically, like trying to use the right hashtags and barely knowing what they even did. And it was, unfortunately, it was very also connected to my self-esteem, because I was like putting my work out there, and I was like, oh no, it's not doing well. It's my work must be bad, and of course there's always room for improvement on a technical level. An artist should also like always welcome that, but that's not the main issue with social media.
No.
So yeah, it takes a while to strike that balance.
You're totally right with it, and one can't help but think, you put a post out and think, oh, it's a rubbish painting, okay, because it hasn't done well. But I've done this a few times where I've sort of, for whatever reason, because it's featuring in a gallery or something, is I've posted the same painting like 6 months apart. One has 6,000 likes, and the next time it gets 800. Okay, so it's the same materials, pretty much the same hashtags. And I think sort of being comfortable with social media after a while is to look at it holistically. Because we often, in the moment, you put a post and you think, oh no, I'm just going to give up now, it's rubbish and all of that kind of stuff. But if you look at it over time, say a year or something, you'll see that it's very much like this. And I've heard that with the algorithm, it's kind of like you're a surfer just hanging about in the water there, and then there's these little waves coming in. Sometimes there's nothing, but every now and then, every sort of 7th wave, there's a big wave, and it kind of pushes you forward. But like you say, it's a tool. But so much emphasis has sort of been put on it in the cultural mindset or individual mindset that it's the be all and the end all. But if you're able to sort of just see it as that, you put your post, you step back, and you carry on painting. You just do what you were doing anyway. These kind of things happen. And you mentioned it earlier, that what happens as well is you tend to get a lot of either transient followers or people who kind of, because something's trending, will follow you. But there's often a core who interact with you, and then there's a core who not only interact but buy as well, often buy. And a lot of the time it's about cultivating that little community, whether it's through your mailing lists or, you know, how you're communicating with people who are buying, or social media. So not only are you, you know, an expert photographer as well, you also have to be expert at kind of customer relations and all of that good stuff as well. But it's really interesting. And like you were saying about the gallery aspect, you're in a position now, and I find myself like this as well, that if I'm giving somewhere 50%, they need to be as good, preferably much better than I am at marketing the work, because if that's not the case, you just sell it yourself and keep all of them. I mean, you know, and it's those types of relationships that one has to sort of consider and build. And I think you're an example that you don't need those traditional routes to do it, the galleries, that you can, you know, stand alone in it and develop your own thing. Also weather the storm of doing that, because it's not easy, but there is a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely takes perseverance. And I mean, I think that you really hit it spot on with your metaphor of the, like a surfer with waves.
Yes.
And that's exactly it. I mean, I couldn't have put it better. It really is. So like initially I was going through the figuring out phase, and I really was like growing very slowly on social media and getting very frustrated with it, of course. But then when things started to finally pick up, I finally understood that I just had to like get my content on a good level, use all of the like hashtags, trending music, you know, all of these sorts of things. And then just sort of sit back and wait for the wave, essentially. So like keep posting, keep going. And even if your post doesn't do so great, maybe the next one will. But if you don't post that next post, it can't do well. So just keep going, keep going. And that's what happened to me with the waves, is that around like December last year, almost by now, I had this one reel that got picked up by the algorithm, and it went absolutely viral, and it brought me so many followers and so much attention all at once, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I was like, at the time I was at like 3,000 followers, and fantastic, all 3,000 of them. I love them. They were there like from the beginning. And then like I in like 2 months or so, I'd hit like 30,000, and that was like so shocking to me. And then it sort of tapered off, and I kept like posting, and apparently the algorithm also had changed, it had updated, and I couldn't really keep up. I was like, okay, what do I have to do now? And it took me a while to figure it out, and then I finally did. It was like a minor change, something like changing the amount of hashtags that I was using or something like that. And then it picked up again, and there was another wave, and I had another video go viral, and then it tapered off again. And so it's just like, you know, I don't get discouraged anymore when things slow down, because it's like it's temporary, and I don't get overexcited when things go well, because it's also temporary. It's like that's a wave. It's awesome. I love it, but it's going to end, and then it'll pick up again. So yeah, you really hit it spot on. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's that, like I was saying as well, that holistic view that you tend just to see it over the long, like you're saying, it's up and down. It's not one consistent thing. So what advice would you give to any artists out there who are sort of want to go down a similar path as you, to become an independent artist and to sort of grow like that and make it their job? Is there any advice you'd give?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My number one piece of advice is perseverance, especially in the things that you find sort of more unpleasant, like social media. I mean, I've persevered in my painting, in my technique, in bettering my technique, and all of that. but that's kind of natural. I mean, as an artist, that's what you're interested in. That's what you want to be doing. So obviously you're going to persevere in that. But take that same kind of perseverance and put it into the other sort of satellite skills like photography, social media, marketing, stuff like that. And most of all, like, just keep going. It's really like rare that somebody gets to this point overnight. It takes years. I mean, I've been posting consistently on social media since 2020, and it was really slow going at first, but I didn't stop. And so absolutely perseverance, number one piece of advice. And the second piece of advice is absolutely to consider social media as a tool, because it's very easy to let it affect your self-esteem and your mental health, and that it's absolutely not worth it, because it's a tool. It is it doesn't say anything about you as a person. It doesn't say anything about society, the way society is going, because I've noticed a lot of people, like, I've given some talks about social media for artists, and some people tend to take it really personally, and they'll say things like, oh, this is the way society is going, I'm supposed to just hop on trends and do them, you know. It's like, no, it's not so indicative of society. I mean, you're simply using a tool. You're not selling yourself out. You're not, you know, you're using something. Actually, what comes to mind is my marketing teacher in art school. He said something that was absolutely, like, it changed my mind about marketing on the spot. Because I'd come into the first marketing class of the semester basically with my arms crossed, thinking like, oh, what is this guy going to tell me? You know, like, who needs marketing? We're artists, you know? And so it's absolutely like not for that. And he said, marketing is not in your face advertisement. It is basically communication. Like, all you're really trying to do is you're doing something that you believe in, that you think is great and that people should see and you want to share with the world. Marketing is communicating that. Don't you want to tell people what you're doing? Of course you do. Like, you have something that you think would make people happy, so tell them about it. Don't be shy about telling them about it. And that changed my mind on the spot. I was like, yeah, I don't have to be some in-your-face advertiser, you know. I can just be myself and put that out there on social media. And some people will love it, some people will hate it. You know, that's just how it is. But yeah, it's simply a tool to communicate what you're doing, something of value that you want to offer to the world. So yeah, that is also a big piece of advice. Don't let the marketing get you down.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So really good advice. Go on, Sam.
So I was just going to say that we do like to, at the end, direct people who are watching and listening to the places where you want them to see your work and support you. So where is it that you'd like people to go and view your work and purchase your work and speak to you?
Absolutely. Well, definitely Instagram is a really good way to keep up with me and see what I'm doing. And also my mailing list. So I'm planning on creating a channel on Instagram. It's this new feature that has like these like group chats where the artist posts and like it's a direct message sort of thing. So I'm planning on opening one of those on my Instagram. And the other form of direct communication that I have is the mailing list. And also from my Instagram, you can easily find my website. And that's where I share my work, and that's where my work can be purchased. At the moment, it is completely sold out, but there are prints that are still available, also running a bit low, but they're still there for now. But I am working on a new collection that is going to be coming out in the next month or so. So I notify people on my mailing list when that happens, when the paintings are ready. And then I also post to social media later on.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put all the links in the description below. You've been really generous with your time. It's been a real treat talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you.
so much. I've had a great time talking to both of you, and I really love your work, Richard. It's
Oh, thank you very
amazing.
much. Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to talk to you, and I love your work too. And
Thank you. Thank
thank
you.
you.